All right. Hey, everybody. This is Cliff from SpeedCurve. I'm really excited today to be chatting with a good friend that we know here at SpeedCurve and love, Harry Roberts. So Harry is an independent web performance consultant, over 17 years of experience, although I kind of find that hard to believe. The guy is young and attractive and,
He isn't.
17 years. Come on. Lots of experience working with huge brands, Google, BBC, GE, the UN, I think I saw on your site. Is that correct?
Correct,
Yeah,
yes.
awesome. Well-known speaker, internationally recognized leader in front-end performance, and much, much more. He's also the co-chair of the best performance conference in the world, Performance Now, which is held each fall in Amsterdam, which happens to be the last time that we saw each other, Harry. So it's been a while, and it's good to see you again. How you doing?
Been a while. That was a phenomenal intro. I'm going to slice that bit out and I'll just give that out to conferences. That was wild. Thank you very much. The 17 years of experience is true, but that's only because I was such a nerd that I registered my domain name when I was 17 years old, which was 17 years ago. And I got my first job at that time. So as a consultant, I think I've got 11 years experience overall in tech. It is now. You're right. It's 17 years.
Wow.
But yeah, no, it's great to see you. It's been a few months, I guess. It was sort of a fall, wintry sort of Amsterdam. We went for dinner together, and I think that's when we had the first idea for this kind of this hangout, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what we wanted to do is we thought it'd be great for really for everybody, but also for people that are doing consulting or people that are focused on making performance better for clients, agencies, that sort of thing. But also just everybody to sort of hear a little bit more about you, and hear about our relationship because it's pretty unique one, right? So obviously we love
Absolutely.
you, and I love when you're up on stage and you're presenting things, and I always feel so flattered when you're throwing up a speed curve chart or something like that to illustrate something. But you don't work for SpeedCurve, and that's pretty clear, right? You're a friend, and you use our tools, but I like to think that's by choice.
It's very much by choice. And in advance of this hangout now, in preparation for this, I was trying to remember how SpeedCurve got on my radar, and I simply cannot remember. I don't know if it's worth pointing out for anyone who is watching. There's no sort of we don't have a commercial relationship. Like, I'm not sponsored by you. I just have used SpeedCurve for so long that I think we have just become friends. Normally, me pestering for feature requests or asking for advice. Um, so I don't actually know where my journey with SpeedCurve started. I can go back into talks and I can go into slide decks many, many years, and SpeedCurve dashboards show up. But I can't remember my first ever, that light bulb moment with the tool. It just seems fairly omnipresent now. It's just such a big part of my day-to-day working life that I don't really remember
Yeah,
the first time I used SpeedCurve, which is crazy to me because it feels like it still feels shiny and new and fun.
yeah. Well, absolutely. I think we're while I'm not necessarily shiny, new, and fun, it does feel it does feel like I'm working on a product that is, and it's been certainly a fun ride here. So can you maybe tell us a little bit about how you're using SpeedCurve with your clients or in these engagements that you're doing?
Happily. So I think context for anyone who doesn't either work in web performance or is new to it. Normally, what happens is I get an email from a client, a potential client, and they say, our website is slow and we'd like to make it faster. And one of the first questions is, how do you know it's slow? Is it just general sentiment? Can you just tell sometimes you can just tell you've got a slow website, right? There may be customer complaints, and that's the serious one. If your customers are complaining that a site is slow, um, but if you want to make a website faster, you need to objectively know how, where, and why it's slow in the first place. And certainly without a tool like SpeedCurve or nowadays Crux is probably the lowest fidelity way to get there. Um, Without the data supporting the argument of the site is slow, you can't really make the case for the site is now faster. So where it
Right.
fits into SpeedCurve bookends my projects where I can, if my client doesn't have SpeedCurve or similar installed already. The first way that I would use SpeedCurve is when a client gets in touch, let's say the lead time to start that project is going to be 2 months, 6 weeks, whatever. I will try and encourage that client right now, go and install SpeedCurve, leave it running, until I can join the project or the project starts. And then we've got at least a month of rich, real data that spans various demographics, geographic locales, device types. I've got really rich data that helps me understand if the site is slow in the first place, where it's slow, why it's slow. That is a huge, huge part of my early work on a project. If the client is feeling ambitious enough, especially if they've got a conversion-driven website, maybe they're a charity and they're looking for donations, or an e-com site, so they're just literally selling things. Or I've worked with streaming services, right? And they just want people more engaged. Do people watch more minutes of video if the site is faster? If my client is ambitious enough and that is relevant to them, when we install that initial SpeedCurve snippet, when we initially get SpeedCurve set up on the site, what I will do is I will then capture conversion rate data. So not only can we work out, is the site slow, then we can work out things like, and every further 100 milliseconds of slowdown costs you X% of revenue. That can then be used, I call that kind of sprint zero, because that can then be used to actually price the project. So we could say, well, if your site was 250 milliseconds faster, you're going to make an extra $108,000 a year. Therefore, the cost of the project probably shouldn't be more than 108. It should be a percentage of that. And that can really help sort of the business analysis, the business case for web performance. For me, that is the most useful way, selfishly, for me to use SpeedCurve, is to be armed with the early data. And it goes much, much deeper, but I don't want to give too long an answer. But that's the first way that I use SpeedCurve, is just the richer the data that I have, the more effective the project can be. Before using SpeedCurve or without SpeedCurve, you would, to an extent, be shooting in the dark. You'd draw some synthetic tests. You'd use web page tests to say, well, in this laboratory environment, your site is only this fast or slow. But that doesn't really reflect what a real user might experience. Going into a project with real user data, it's the biggest game changer, and it's probably the biggest predictor of a successful project. This has become a very long answer to a short question, because I've got part two.
It's very pertinent. I think it's absolutely something that we see, and I've seen from my own personal experience way back in the day. So dating myself as well. When I was at Walmart Labs and I was running the performance team there, I had to really fight for performance. I really had to kind of make a case for it, because it's not like developers are sitting around on their hands or twiddling their thumbs doing nothing. They've always got priorities. They've always got things they're focused on. These are things that are usually getting pushed, top down. Less so maybe they're working on technical debt, things like that. But I think what you're talking about, what you're illustrating, is like what I found I had to do, which was tying performance back to business value. Being able to say, hey, I know that we prioritized XYZ and maybe like an improved cart flow, or optimized cart and checkout, or whatever it might be. However, I can actually show you and demonstrate that improving our front end time at the time was what we were focused on. At the 95th percentile by X seconds is potentially going to equate to real gains in revenue. So I think that's pretty fantastic.
Yeah, it's huge. And as well, like what I find really interesting is you're absolutely right. Developers aren't just they're not building slow websites for a start. They're not doing things wrong, but there's always something that needs doing that is usually seen as more important. Performance is invisible. No one cares about security until after they've been hacked, right? So it's really hard to make a case of something that isn't a shiny new feature. I think intuitively, any CEO, any CTO, any head of e-commerce, anyone intuitively knows that faster is better. All things being equal, would you have the exact same site, fast version, or the exact same site, slow version? Everyone's going to pick the faster version, but to what end, right? So I think that's one of the biggest things. And it's one of the things my clients, okay, that sounds rude. Well, I'll take that back. It's one of the things that I really try and encourage my clients to do that they haven't necessarily thought about is, what is this even worth to you? Because you could spend more hiring me than this is actually worth to you. And I don't want that for anyone, because it's not good business sense, is it? Well, I mean, for me, I suppose it is, but I don't want to be the guy who sells solutions to problems that don't exist. Yeah. And using a tool like SpeedCurve, where you can capture that custom data, whether it is a conversion or size of cart or average order value, and be able to tie it back to specific customer events is is really powerful. And the other thing as well is you can correlate interesting things. So yeah, we can say improved LCP increases the likelihood of purchase by 8%. But because of the amount of rich data that SpeedCurve gives me, and this is a true story, you know, when you've got like a product details page and you've got your main product image here, and then you've got all your thumbnails beneath it. Because SpeedCurve captures things like images above the fold, you can correlate the sweet spot. And we found out, I think, we didn't ever do any like real customer research into this, but the more thumbnails, the more product thumbnails, the less likely someone was to purchase. And I just wonder if that's a case of just a bit of overload, you know, a bit of like too much information. And we found that the sweet spot is if you just have 4 images in your gallery carousel thing, your 4 thumbnails, statistically, and it, you know, causation correlation, you can argue many different looks or takes on the data.
Sure.
But it's the silly things like that where, okay, yeah, you've hired me to look at site speed, but just out of interest, is there any correlation between the numbers of images above the fold and the likelihood of conversion? And for one client, we found that, yeah, that sweet spot was 4. They would tend to sell more products if they only had 4 product images as opposed to 7 or 11. And stuff like that I just find fascinating.
Yeah, no, totally. I've heard that. I haven't. One of our customers also shared with me search results very much the same way. Okay, so we've got search results. You would think, okay, let's just throw as many results as we can on this page. And of course, that's not going to do great things for performance, even if you're lazy loading stuff below the fold.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, bigger, more complex DOM, whatever. It's not necessarily the best idea, but sort of in their mind, it's like more options, more chances that people are going to go and click and go to that product details page. But they found when they actually cut it in half from like 50 to 25, performance got better and engagement got a lot higher. However, then they cut it down even more. Like, hey, okay, let's go the other direction. Performance really matters here. We need to actually look at minimizing this even more. And they cut it down to something like 10 or under 10 search results, which was kind of silly. And they saw engagement drop off horribly. So even though performance is better, it wasn't always
Yeah,
better
yeah.
in context. So finding that sweet spot, I do think is important. Um,
Yeah.
this actually made me think about something about how you go about these engagements. And one of the things that we love to do is look at experimentation or A/B testing performance changes. Do you find that your clients are typically up for that? Is it something where they're mature enough to actually say, okay, yeah, we're actually going to make this change and send it to X percentage of our traffic and see what impact that has on conversion?
I've got a couple of real good success stories with that. It's not as common as I would like it to be. I feel like experimentation, A/B testing is always the smartest way to roll. Making LCP faster is always going to be the best idea, right? But
Yeah.
just making it faster is always better. And there will be a point of diminishing returns. So certain things don't need A/B testing, right? You know, inlining your CSS, we don't need an A/B test for that. It'll just be
Sure.
faster. That is just better. But for certain things where there is a bit more of a trade-off, where, well, I'll just dive straight in with the example. I worked with a large US manufacturing firm, I guess you might call them, and they were using a particularly slow font provider. And I've got a bit of I'm a typography nerd, and I like type, I like nicely set sort of type and designs. But that's a trade-off. It comes at a cost. And this particular font provider was quite slow. So I just asked, and they were licensing a custom font. So it wasn't just Google Fonts. It wasn't free. It was they were licensing a font for just over $100,000 a year, and it was just really tanking page speed or site speed. So I just asked them, look, can we just run an A/B test? And for just 1% of your users, and it was really easy to set this A/B test up directly in SpeedCurve because all we had to do was they're using quite a traditional stack, which is music to my ears because it's easy to make old stacks faster. So they had a PHP sort of e-com site, and we just literally wrote a bit of PHP that said, for 1% of requests to this site, don't give the custom font and set a cookie saying they haven't been given the custom font, and then tell SpeedCurve we've done that. Bounce rate went from 88% down to 61%. I think
Wow.
roughly those are the numbers. So an over 25 percentage point improvement in bounce rate just from removing a custom font. Now, what that meant was we proved a business case for saving them over $100,000 a year, because obviously get rid of the font, right? Get the designer, worked with a really great designer who actually went on to build a really, really nice website about modern font stacks, like removing custom fonts. That spawned off its own side project. But it's like win on top of win. We could prove that bounce rate was measurably better to about 25 percentage point increase or improvement, sorry. And we saved them licensing costs of over $100,000 a year. One A/B test proved that data.
Wow.
Another one, I've got a client where they've just got this mega Google Tag Manager instance, and the one Google Tag Manager contains 4 different containers. And it's this just beast, this Frankenstein's monster of a tag manager that's been touched by 100 people over the last 10 years. And I'm convinced that's the biggest problem about INP issues, but I can't prove it until we whip it out. But the data that is coming out of there is so critical to the business that we can't just remove it. A very, very brave soul, and I'm very grateful to them, allowed us to run an A/B test whereby 5% of users to one particular part of the site, it's a very highly trafficked site, just weren't given Tag Manager at all. Now, I'm not comfortable sharing the results of that just yet because it's still actually technically an in-flight project. But again, we can tell SpeedCurve this session didn't have Tag Manager. We can go with local storage as well, which is nice. We don't actually need to use cookies, so it's all GDPR compliant. We can use local storage to record that, so we don't need to worry about consent and compliance. And we can just run an A/B test, and we can tell SpeedCurve, I want to plot all of the non-Tag Manager sessions against the with Tag Manager, and just sort of quantify the impact. And then we can correlate that with, is the data we're getting more valuable than the engagement we're losing? Because okay, I'm a performance engineer. No one cares about performance more than me. But if the business could say, right, we can see that Tag Manager is harming INP, but the data we're getting from Tag Manager is worth more than what the bad INP is losing us, then just have bad INP, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
No one really wants the fastest website. If someone wanted the fastest website, they'd let me delete all of their CSS, delete all of their JavaScript, be Times New Roman. It's a balancing act. And ultimately, what we want is the most effective website. And even if that means slower but more profitable, then we just stick with slower. Ideally, we'd have both. But realistically, my clients just want more effective websites.
Yeah, I think it comes down to revenue. I mean, it does. I mean, like most of the sites that we're working with, it's they are there for a purpose. They're there for whether it's generating revenue or in case of nonprofits, just generating that user engagement. There's always, that's the ultimate measure, right? And I kind of
of course,
my clients that as well. Like, the ultimate outcome is not better performance, right? It's whatever that is that you're striving for. Or
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, totally. So you mentioned a lot of examples there, which I really appreciate. Like, are there any common themes or issues that you're finding across your clients? Like, are they all, hey, I always go in and I do this because I know it's some low-hanging fruit. I'm going to get a great win for this. Or, are they all unique? Like, are there, is it more case specific? And obviously, without giving away too many of the goods, obviously you are for hire. We're not trying to get free consulting here, but what are some of those patterns you're seeing?
So I'll be completely honest with you. There are only 2 big patterns that I tend to see. Sites that have gone all in on JavaScript are slower and more difficult and more expensive to make fast. That's the first pattern I will see. Any site that is an SPA is going to have 2 problems. One, it's going to be hard to capture decent metrics because SPAs sidestep the web platform. It's not SpeedCurve's fault that data can't be captured. It's not Core Web Vitals or Crux's fault that data can't be captured. If you're going to sidestep the web platform, you don't get web platform features. That makes analysis incredibly difficult. Even the best tooling in the world at present cannot bridge that gap. That if you're using an SPA, you're going to struggle to make that site faster because it's harder to know where it is slow.
Sure.
Common patterns that evolve are the more JavaScript you have, the slower that site is going to be. And the worst thing is that sites tend towards more JavaScript over time, not less. You release a site on Next.js now, it's already got too much JavaScript. in 6 months' time, you can guarantee it won't have less. It's always going up. So those kind of sites always tend towards worse performance, which means that guardrails, tracking bundle sizes, regression tests, deploy tests, they're vital. That's one common pattern. As soon as I see an inquiry from a client and they've got a single page application, and also don't even get me started on single page applications. If you've got a home page, a search results page, a product page, a product listing page, that's not a single page application. I've just named 4 pages. Nearly every website on the planet that is an SPA shouldn't be. Trello, that's an SPA. Photoshop in the browser, that's a single page app. Your e-commerce site should not be built with JavaScript. It should not be a single page app. That's me just ranting now. So that's the most common pattern, is if you've got a single page app, if you're using a lot of JavaScript, it's going to be a lot harder to find the problems and remedy them. Not impossible, just more expensive. And usually the tragedy there is that's a problem the team have caused for themselves. The flip side is, again, I'm reluctant to name any names, even though this is like a victory. I worked with a firm here in the UK. They're a worldwide brand, but they're a very British firm. And they their site was built on my mind's gone completely like Laravel. It was a lamp stack, which, I mean, Laravel and sort of everything's having a bit of a spring, or a bit of a resurgence at the moment, which I'm very happy to see. But we got this project to 99.8% passing Core Web Vitals over 335 million page views. So getting to 99.8% passing over 335 million page views, that was trivial. That was easy when building on a traditional boring stack. That I wouldn't fancy my chances doing that with a React application, Nuxt, Vue, whatever. So that's the only real pattern I ever tend to see. Another emerging pattern I am seeing, people are really digging sort of the ergonomics and the developer experience of headless commerce and sort of like headless content. And again, not going to name any names, but there are certain providers who all they do is headless content. You've got your digital asset management, you've got all of your CMSs in one provider, all of your SKUs for your web shop are in another provider. And these are clients where they've built single page apps on top of this headless architecture, and they're suffering horrendously with time to first byte issues, because that one request that would traditionally go into a Magento store, and it would just say, right, here's Magento, let's go and look in your database, here are the products, here's how many they've got in stock, here's the price, send that back. One HTTP request, one sort of there and back life cycle. Now what happens is a request comes in for a sort of server rendered page or SSR, and all of a sudden you've got an API endpoint that lives in a totally different place, and it might even live on a different continent, right? Depending on who your provider is. So that one request that comes in for a page that traditionally would have just been one request, one response, it now fans out to, right, we need to go over here to get the CMS content for this product. We need to go to this provider to get the SKU information, the stock price information, all of that kind of stuff. So now I see these really trendy modern stacks that are like, yeah, it's convenient, yeah, it's nice, it kind of feels a bit edgy to be using all these new tools to build what is really a solved problem. I'm just seeing times first byte skyrocket, and I've got 2 clients with very, very similar stacks, very similar objectives, suffering the exact same fate. So those are the 2 most emergent patterns I'm seeing in the last couple of years, maybe a bit longer.
It's kind of crazy. I'm seeing it a lot too. Like literally was just looking at it before this call with a customer where their time to first byte just jumped up horrendously. And it wasn't necessarily due to server-side rendering. It wasn't due to any real architectural changes that they made, and we're still trying to get to the bottom of it. They're going to start capturing server timing so they can get a little bit more detail into like, hey, is this the CDN? Are we seeing like requests that are going back to origin? But then there's also kind of this emergence of like looking more at some of those subparts, I would call them, I guess, without a better term, for what's in time to first byte. The redirect time, server time, connection time, the TLS handshake, all that stuff. So it still feels like it's funny because we always talked about like 90% of the time spent on the front end, and I think that that's absolutely true. I wouldn't go back against that, but we can't ignore this other part that is so critical to start render and FCP, LCP, all those things that are more sort of a user experience metric.
Right. So this is actually, I had exactly what you just said. I had a major breakthrough on a client project with SpeedCurve. And this is going to seem like a setup, but if you want, I can show you it now. If we just like take a pause now while I go and get a dashboard up, and we'll get back and I'll show you the bit you mentioned about subparts on time to first byte. SpeedCurve got me to the bottom of a really complex problem recently.
Nice.
So let me just go and grab some dashboards, and I'll
Cool.
show you what I mean, because that's the kind of information that is vital.
Okay, so I swear I'm not throwing Harry a softball here, but I think he's got a good use case to sort of illustrate some of the getting behind time to first byte a little bit from a client.
Yeah. So exactly as you were just saying, like the subparts of time to first byte, and the historical sort of, not belief, because it is true, most slowdowns happen on the front end. But if you've got bad time to first byte, you're really going to struggle to hit your front end targets. So I think, as most people watching probably are already aware, Google make this incredible amount of data freely available. To have this for free is truly remarkable. It's not without its downsides. This is data specific only to Chrome, and that's Chrome, not on iOS. But having this for free, I think, is a remarkable sea change for the industry. But what you'll see, this client around this time last year suffered time to first byte regressions. But this is very opaque. Like, what's going on there? Is it increased server load? Is it API calls? Is it database reads? What is going on here? This data, and remember, it is free, so we can't criticize it, but this data is very opaque. So I told this client, hey, look, we can get to the bottom of this and many other things. This client is actually a huge, huge SpeedCurve fan now. They adore SpeedCurve. But we installed SpeedCurve, and I got some great insights. Because what we can see, and this covers the last, I think, 1 month of data, is we break down the subparts, or SpeedCurve allows us to break down the subparts that everyone else just calls time to first byte, right? What you'll see is that DNS, your initial connection, and your TLS are basically effectively zeroed out. They're so quick, they don't even really register. Other network, again, 0. Server response, 800 milliseconds, but the real concern for me is this 600 millisecond redirect. So I was like, immediately, not problem solved as such, but this is like an immediate, right, well, there's your problem, redirects. This site is suffering with redirects. One thing I really adore about SpeedCurve, and you do need to be a little bit of a graph nerd, or a little bit about interrogating data, because I think SpeedCurve is like the performance engineer's tool. I think it's very, very well suited to the power user. It's a bit like a Swiss Army knife. It's got loads of different tools on it. You just need to know when to use which one. I was fascinated by this data. Obviously, it seems that about 600 milliseconds of our delay are attributable to redirects. That seems quite extreme, and I didn't really notice many redirects as I used the application. So one thing, and this is like the simplest way to look at it, is just the number of incidents of these things. So if we look at server response, on the 4th of March at 1 p.m., we've got nearly 33,000 page views that logged a server response metric, or a timing for server response. The same day, on the same snapshot, we logged just 561 redirects. So what we can see here is that redirects are actually, though very long and very slow and very problematic, they are in the vast minority of use cases. So looking at this data, I can go deeper. Rather than just saying we've got a problem with redirects, what I can say is we appear to have a very, very localized problem with redirects. And wherever these are happening, it's in the minority, but they are very extreme. So this is just a time series graph, and I guess most people using SpeedCurve, this will be the most common type of graph they would interface with. But I'm really fond of being able to plot histograms. Yeah. So what I did is I just created a quick chart where I plot the number of incidences of backend time, so overall time to first byte, the number of redirects, and the number of server responses, again over the same 1 month period. And what we'll see is that if we actually try and just look at redirects, I don't know if you can even see that. If you look around this sort of 0.2 and 0.4 on the x-axis, the number of redirects we actually incur on this site is minuscule. And what this allowed me to do is pinpoint the fact that, yes, redirects do take a lot longer than I would like, but they are not really the problem affecting this site at scale. Like most of the time, we're not incurring redirects. When we do, they're very, very expensive, right? 600 milliseconds. But it allowed me to not go down the wrong path. It allowed me to not waste time assuming that redirects were happening everywhere. And being able to just manipulate raw data like this in many different chart types is, for me, it's phenomenal because, yes, you have to know what you're doing, but even if you've got a slight intuition for graphs or looking at data, you can save so much time. I mean, so if you look at the process, we've got back-end time, it's very opaque, don't really know why. And we look at this, you might draw the conclusion, oh, back-end time is slow because we've got redirects. Then we look at this, we say, we have slow redirects, but that's not why we have slow back-end times. And it turns out for this particular client, this particular project, this particular site, the time really is just majority spent on server responses, expensive API calls, and things like that, rather than this sort of like this almost misleading sort of red herring of redirects. This for me is like a bit of a roller coaster journey. And I don't know if she ever told you, but I actually, when Tammy and I were organizing one of the Perf Now events, we were on a call just about the conference. I asked her to stay on the call for a bit afterwards, just so I could tell her about this, because I just felt so proud of myself for digging through this data and getting to the bottom of it. You can't do that with tools that don't let you manipulate your own data. For me, that was a really fun. Don't ever invite me to a dinner party. My idea of fun. I thought this was a really cool use case. I thought this was a really cool use case for the tool. Just really enlightening. So the subparts thing you're talking about, just stepping through each of these three tabs and just seeing the progression of just digging deeper, I just found that really, really valuable. And yeah, it's just funny you should mention subparts of time first byte, because that was one of the biggest breakthroughs I had, the most fun breakthroughs I had recently with SpeedCurve.
Nice.
I'm going to stop sharing now. I think that's
awesome. Thanks for sharing that. I think it's always fun to see people using the tool and seeing how they're using it, and a lot of similarities I think that we run into. So yeah, I think that's going to be helpful for a lot of people. We haven't really gone here yet, but you've mentioned a couple metrics that I can use to jump to this topic, which is Core Web Vitals. On top of having a great data set in Crux, I do think Core Web Vitals have been a pretty great move for our industry, certainly in terms of visibility and getting more of a conversation going around performance. But do you find that your customers, the people that you're working with, do you feel like they're focusing too much on Core Web Vitals? Do you feel like they're maybe not focusing enough? Where's that line, and what are your thoughts on that?
I go not conflicting views. I have different. It's a difficult one. I'm with you. I think Core Web Vitals are great as a metric, but I think there are two sides to Core Web Vitals. I think the move to standardize performance metrics is really valuable, and I genuinely LTP, INP, CLS, I think are great metrics, and I like how well researched they are, how well defended they are. I'm a fan of Core Web Vitals as a metric, but what you have to remember is there's a different side to Core Web Vitals, and that different side to Core Web Vitals is you got to pass these to get up high on Google, and that's like the cult of Core Web Vitals. And the biggest problem there is that, well, not the biggest. There are multiple problems. One is, are you prioritizing performance for the wrong reasons? Given it's now an incentive, there's a slew of people gaming the system. I don't care if they're doing that. It doesn't really affect me. I don't work with those kind of people, so it doesn't really affect me. But the ethicist or the person who cares inside of me, because there is one somewhere that cares, I just think it's doing it for the wrong reasons. But then the other problem, of course, is that even if you cared for the right reasons and you think Core Web Vitals are great, and we know that better LCP leads to better user experience, better customer satisfaction, it's Chrome only for now. That's not Chrome's fault. I mean, we've got the interop thing. Shout out to Ryan Townsend, a good friend of ours, who actually put forward Core Web Vitals for Interop 2025. We'll put probably a link to that if we've got any show notes. I'll put a link to that because he did a very simple but very important thing he did to get it on the radar. And Safari are now considering implementing it. But if you're going to go all in on Core Web Vitals, and again, it's not your fault as a site owner or as a business, but if you're over-indexing on Core Web Vitals, you're leaving a lot of opportunity on the table for your entire iOS audience for a start. I've worked with clients in the past who, one very high-end fashion retailer, they were like over 80% iOS traffic. Optimizing Core Web Vitals for them was not a wasted endeavor, but not a measurable one. I've got a current client, they're 51% iOS traffic, and their entire project is based on improving Core Web Vitals. Here's an interesting bit of research you could do. You could take all the data you've got, your anonymous customer data in SpeedCurve, you could run the numbers. You know, it'd be really interesting to see if do Core Web Vitals data gathered from Chrome visits in any way predict faster iOS experiences? Obviously, because there is no LTP in Safari, you can't do it like for like, but could you proxy it? FCP is in Safari and Chrome. So what I'd love to see is maybe, I'm sorry, I'm giving you a job now, but like given the data SpeedCurve has, anonymizing that and saying, well, do you know what? If you do improve Core Web Vitals, it looks like that will have a positive impact on Safari or iOS by this percentage because, you know what I'm trying to say? Like,
sure, yeah.
Could we still use Core Web Vitals as a predictor for better experiences in Safari? My instinct is, of course, yes, but we don't know. So yeah, Core Web Vitals, I'm a fan of the metrics. I'm a fan of the rigorous sort of definitions of the metrics. I'm less of a fan of the kind of the cult of Core Web Vitals, optimizing Core Web Vitals for the sake of it rather than understanding the business impact. And of course, Google haven't helped. They haven't actually published any expected increase in ranking. Like if they said, oh yeah, it's about 5% of your ranking, that would give people a lot more confidence in whether they should embark on it or not. So everyone's just been shooting in the dark. And I am starting to see what I think I would call like the post-Core Web Vitals world. I'm getting inquiries now where people might be using Core Web Vitals as the metric to optimize, but they're not doing it for SEO. They're doing it because they know that INP will affect engagement and LTP might affect conversions.
Right.
So it's a bit of a double-edged sword. I think the cult of Core Web Vitals is sort of in the rearview mirror now. The whole hype train around rankings. Any studies are just anecdotal. No one knows for definite if it's worth doing. So I feel like people are leaving that behind. I'm seeing in my own inquiries and the work I'm doing, people are less bothered about SEO and they're going back to kind of olden days perf, the kind of web performance you and I came up on.
Sure. Well, you heard it here first. The title for your next conference talk, The Cult of Core Web Vitals. I love it. I agree with you. And again, it's kind of hard because on one hand, it's like I really hold the team up, Annie Sullivan and her team have just done such a fantastic, phenomenal
incredible work.
Yeah, like moving the needle like in a very big way. And honestly, I can tell you just by talking with them and meeting with her team, it's like they're doing it because they love performance and they really want to make these user experiences better. And I think being able to maybe leverage some of the impact on our search ranking or whatever to move the dial, like kudos to them. That's awesome. However, they have no control over what WebKit does. They have no control, over Apple essentially, and that is just such a huge gap. We do hope to see at least LCP and potentially event timing INP in this year with WebKit, but still no CLS. But then that begs like even a bigger question, like this data that people are starting from and going off of is Chrome User Experience Report, is Crux data. I would put money on this to say like there is no way in hell that that Chrome is going to say, yeah, let's include Safari data in Crux.
Well, no, the thing is, I mean, you cannot get, because Edge has Core Web Vitals as a first-class citizen because it's Chromium, but you can't get Edge data into Crux. And that's to be expected because it's Crux. which
Right.
begs the question: would Apple have to call theirs sucks?
Yeah.
It's Safari, right? But
Well,
yeah, sorry,
I mean,
that wasn't very good.
that would work. That would work. I don't know. That might be a branding issue a little bit.
Yeah.
I think
Um,
I think the folks from Vision have coded that term already, so I'll give props to them for it. But
oh,
yeah,
really? Yeah. I mean, but you're absolutely right. Yeah. So even if Safari do start supporting the metrics, surfacing that data, because of course, like, and this confuses a lot of my clients, understandably so. Core Web Vitals and Crux are different things.
right,
Like, Core Web Vitals are the metrics that could be available everywhere. Crux is just the data captured by Chrome visits that cover those metrics. So even looking at basically just that subtle distinction that Crux and Core Web Vitals are different things. And I think a lot of people don't understand the impact that has. And a lot of my clients, a lot of developers don't even realize that Chrome on iOS, certainly at the time of recording, is just Safari. It's not Chrome at all. Yeah, it syncs your bookmarks across different devices. That's about it. It's not Safari. Sorry, it's not Chrome at all, and it's a huge blind spot. And that, do you know what? Not to sort of big you up too much on this sort of fireside chat, but one of the biggest draws for my clients is that if we put SpeedCurve on their site, they get full visibility of their Safari and iOS traffic,
right.
and their 3 Firefox users. But yeah, so that plugs a huge gap. And my biggest sort of current client, when we looked at their Google Analytics data, they saw they were about 51% iOS traffic. And I had to tell them, well, you do understand that all of the Core Vitals data we've got and all the Crux data we're benchmarking ourselves against only takes into account 49% of our users. And that kind of sent a bit of a, I was in the senior leadership, and that sent a bit of a ripple through the room because people hadn't realized. And that made SpeedCurve an even easier sell. Because I was like, oh, we can remedy that easily, but we can't do it with Crux.
Right. Makes sense. Makes sense. So I know that we're kind of coming up on the end of our time here, and we've covered a lot. And certainly I could go on. We should just do this monthly or something. But without trying to sound too pitchy, without trying to sound too much of a page shill myself, you use a lot of tools, and I'll be the first to
Yes.
say that there's some fantastic tools out there. I've never been more proud to be in a group of competitors that have such a high caliber of focus around performance. So I don't want to knock those tools at all, because credit where credit's due, and I've worked at some of those companies before and worked on those products. So I'm not going to be a hypocrite. But what would you say is different about SpeedCurve? Why would you use SpeedCurve? You've given some examples already, so I apologize for making you restate them. But from
No,
your
it's
view,
fair.
what's the real differentiator there?
Yeah, well, I mean, okay, well, let's take one step back and sort of agree with what you just said. Is there are some great alternatives to SpeedCurve out there.
Yeah.
I got a personal account with Request Metrics to check out
Yeah.
what they're getting up to, and it's really good. RunVision, I was working on an ecom site recently, and RunVision was already installed on there. And it's like, if you've got a project that is a Core Web Vitals project, then those tools are very, very honed in on that.
Yeah.
They're very predisposed to, if you're fixing Core Web Vitals, here's your Core Web Vitals data. One thing I really, really do love about SpeedCurve, and actually other competitors, other tools exist other than the ones I've just mentioned. One thing I find with a lot of other companies that are a bit older is their RUM solution seems like a bit of a afterthought in a lot of cases. I've used tools, and I'm not going to name any names because this is critical. It's a bit of a diss. I found that companies that traditionally sell APM, like back-end application performance monitoring tools,
Sure.
I tend to find that their RUM tools are like not a core business unit, and therefore don't get the same resources, the same look-in. I've seen companies changing that. I've seen companies improving their RUM offering. But so two things that I like about SpeedCurve is that you've been around long enough that you aren't just like a Core Web Vitals parrot. You were designed before Core Web Vitals even existed, which means that there's a key focus on a holistic look at user experience. You know, you've got user happiness score. You've got ability to track Safari, Firefox, other browsers. It means that if you aren't just doing a pure Core Web Vitals project, which a lot of mine aren't, a lot of mine are revenue-based and conversion-based, having a tool that was built before Core Web Vitals means that you've got a very, very mature and solid baseline for doing API-oriented performance improvements rather than just keeping Google happy. And the other thing is, you weren't spun off from an APM product. SpeedCurve was built from the outset to be, I've never even asked Mark what his motive was, but I think it's just I imagine Mark was just like, we need to build the RUM tool that's missing. And build it from scratch and build it to be a first-class citizen. It's not an add-on for your APM. It's a whole product in its own right. And I think that's shone through and it stood the test of time. I adore Treo. Treo is just as big a part of my toolkit as SpeedCurve is. They solve incredibly different problems. For me, they are entirely complementary. There's no overlap other than sheer quality of product. So SpeedCurve, I think my three main tools that I could not live without: SpeedCurve, Treo, web page test. Those are the three main things. They're all very complementary. I've worked on, like I say, pure Core Web Vitals projects that have had RumVision installed already. And you know what? If you want to know everything about your Core Web Vitals, that's a really good place to start. The kind of biggest problem with a lot of other tools is you don't really get to manipulate that data very well. So the example I just showed with the time first byte subparts, if you're using a tool that is very Core Web Vitals orientated, until Chrome surface those subparts to us, they will always be opaque. Because we're using RUM and proper RUM and actual in-browser stuff and not using just crux and stuff like that. Sorry, I'm going to reword that because RumVision does use proper RUM. They're not using crux.
Yeah, absolutely.
What I meant to say there was probably that because you can sort of manipulate your own data very sort of intricately in SpeedCurve, you just can build up a far more forensic picture of what's going on. And that's probably why it's my favorite. Yeah. I think it's probably, like I said before, it's like the performance engineer's tool. Like it's the one I like because it's very forensic. It allows me to get really deep in the weeds. And that's because I've been doing this for, as you say, like 17 years. In the weeds is where I belong. So yeah, for me, it's just a really, really useful tool for getting really sleeves up, hands dirty.
Yeah. I feel like that's sort of where I was always drawn to SpeedCurve as well, as like a practitioner and working as a competitor prior to SpeedCurve. And I think Mark's initial take on it was also just about how he wanted to present the data in a way. He's a designer, he's a designer by trade. And when Steve joined him, it was sort of the design and performance element between the two of how do we display this data in a meaningful way that makes sense. But further to that, you're right, they were filling a hole that wasn't there, or a RUM product that hadn't been built yet. And I would say for our peers as well in this group, I would include them in this idea that this observability focus that everyone has, and for good reason. There's APM and now it's observability and monitoring, all these different services and machines essentially. I think missed the mark again. Like where's the user experience and all that? Like where's the front end observability? Because I do believe, and I will say, like that some of those larger observability providers have kind of created RUM in that vein and a bit more as a checkbox, where you're not necessarily getting that deep understanding and ability to share it across people who aren't necessarily DevOps or front-end engineers or others that are going to be key to making business decisions and funding performance initiatives.
Yeah, well, that leads me on to an interesting point, actually, because one thing I've neglected to mention is I've been talking about SpeedCurve through my eyes as a performance engineer. Sure. But the reason this is a great story arc, because remember I told you my SpeedCurve bookends my projects. And I'll start with, installing it for my benefit, so I know what's going on. Once a project's reached sufficient maturity, I need to hand that over to a client. I need to know that the business understands how to use SpeedCurve. One thing I love about SpeedCurve is just how cheap and free and easy it is to spin up dashboards on a whim. I also really respect that you don't do pricing based on the number of seats, because that really helps democratize performance.
Sure.
So I any new client project, whenever they install SpeedCurve and I get my login details for their SpeedCurve account, I'll create a private dashboard that I just call Scratchpad or Playground. And that's where I'll just throw things at the wall to see what sticks. No one else needs to see this. This is my messy inner workings of my brain, but it's so cheap and easy for me to do that. LTP went up, right? What metrics correlate with that? I'll throw all those at the wall. It'll be a messy, just like having a messy desk, but it's mine. And no one ever needs to see that. And when I've distilled an idea, I can then go to the shared dashboards and sort of have an overview dashboard, and I can tidy up my thoughts there. And generally what I tend to do with clients is I'll say, look, SpeedCurve is a fantastic tool. You can't really break anything, just go and play around. But for day-to-day observability and day-to-day practical use, go and look at your live dashboard, go and look at your custom dashboard that we've made. I might make a dashboard for marketing, one for finance, one for DevOps, whoever it might be. And that's one thing that the customers, I'm a user of SpeedCurve,
Sure.
but
Right.
the customers, my clients who end up signing up to SpeedCurve, they get a very different thing out of it, which is just distilled, useful information. Never information overload. It's like, look, go and create your own dashboards privately, play around, just see what sticks. Like, it's fun. It really is fun. But ultimately, we've got one or two places that you're going to go to, and that's your little pulse check. Is the site coming nicely? Is it just ticking along? Have we had a regression? So yeah, that brings me back. That's my second half of my how I use SpeedCurve,
Yeah.
is setting up those regressions, making sure clients are comfortable, not overfaced with it. And I love that it can do both. It's a power tool for power users, but equally you can just put it in TV mode, stick it on a screen in the office, and everyone just knows what they're looking at. It's incredible.
That's awesome. Well, this has been long, so I know I'm gonna have to do a lot of post editing here, but again, could go on and on. Thank you so much, Harry. You're a great friend. You're a great champion just in our industry. True performance guru that we've all looked up to for a while, and we absolutely love working with you. I'm going to include some links to how you can get in touch with Harry. Harry is for hire and obviously does an amazing job. If you work with him, your site will get faster, clearly. So definitely want to promote him and hold him up as a strong partner for SpeedCurve. So thanks again, Harry. Really appreciate the time.
That's incredibly kind of you. Yeah, no, it's just nice to hang out, man. We always have a nice time when we hang out. So I've really enjoyed this. And yeah, I don't know. Thanks for your support. Like, people don't see the back channel, but the times I'll ping you or Andy, like, can we add this feature? Can we do this? And the fact that you've stayed such a driven and focused and small team just means that, I don't know, it's just really nice. It's nice working with you. I don't know. Oh,
Appreciate
getting a
it.
bit emotional now, but no, really, really enjoyed this. It's been so much fun.
All right. Well, hopefully I don't have to wait until November, but if it is, or I guess October, if it is October, well, we'll see it for now in the fall.
See you in Amsterdam. But yeah, until then, we'll catch up soon.
All right. See you, buddy.
Take care, dude. Thank you.